A struggling single mother's world changes forever when a billionaire notices the quiet courage in her love for her son. Maria had always been a hard-working woman, but life had a way of testing her patience and strength. She was a single mother, raising her 4-year-old son Leo on her own. Every day was a balancing act for her, a careful juggling of shifts, bills, and the tiny moments of joy she could steal with her little boy. Maria worked at a small family-owned diner in a busy part of the city. The diner was modest, with a few worn-out booths, a long counter lined with stools, and the familiar smell of frying eggs and fresh coffee that greeted every customer as they walked in. It wasn't glamorous work, and it didn't pay much, but it kept a roof over their heads and food on the table. That morning had started like any other, with the sound of her alarm cutting through the silence of their small apartment. Maria had prepared Leo's breakfast, packed his favorite snack for later, and made sure his little backpack was zipped up with his tiny water bottle inside. She kissed him on the forehead, reminding him to behave, and promised they would have a small treat after her shift if he stayed calm. The walk to the diner was filled with quiet conversation, Leo chatting about the shapes of clouds in the sky and Maria listening while trying to keep her mind focused on the long day ahead. When they arrived at the diner, the morning rush had already begun. Regular customers sipped coffee, catching up on the morning news, while new faces appeared and disappeared at the counter. Maria took a deep breath and gave Leo her hand, guiding him through the maze of tables so he wouldn't bump into anyone. She had taught him how to be polite and careful, how to whisper and smile, how to keep his hands to himself. But sometimes, no matter how much guidance she gave, the world could overwhelm him. It happened suddenly that day. The diner had grown louder as more customers arrived, the clatter of dishes mixing with the hum of conversation. Bright sunlight streamed through the large windows, bouncing off the polished counter and reflecting into Leo's eyes. He had always been sensitive to light and noise, but Maria hadn't expected him to react so quickly. His small body froze for a moment, and before she could even reach him, he crawled down onto the floor. Maria's heart skipped a beat, knowing that if she didn't stay calm, Leo could panic even more. Other waitresses and staff were moving quickly around her, taking orders, carrying trays, and occasionally glancing toward Maria and her son. Some looked annoyed, others sympathetic, but none offered to intervene. She knew she had to handle this herself. She knelt down, feeling the hard tile against her knees, and lowered herself fully to his level. "It's okay, Leo," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "I'm right here with you. We'll get through this together." Her hand gently rested on his back as he pressed himself against the floor, seeking comfort in the warmth of her presence. Time seemed to slow down in that moment. The noise of the diner became a background hum as Maria focused solely on her son. She crawled along the floor beside him, mimicking his movements to help him feel less isolated and more secure. Each inch they moved together was a small victory, a step toward calming the storm of fear and sensory overload that had taken over Leo's little body. Maria's face was calm, but inside, she felt a mix of anxiety, exhaustion, and determination. This was just another test, another day where she had to prove her strength not only as a mother but as a human being willing to meet her child's needs. No matter how difficult, customers began to notice, some whispering to each other, others simply staring. Maria ignored them all, focused entirely on guiding Leo back toward a booth where he could sit quietly. She talked to him in a soothing tone, encouraging him with small words of reassurance. "Almost there, buddy. You're doing great." Slowly Leo responded, leaning against her as she helped him climb back onto the booth seat. His breathing gradually slowed, and a small, tired smile appeared on his face. Maria straightened, wiping a small tear from her own cheek. She knew that moments like this were not easy for anyone, especially in a public place, but she also knew that this was part of her life. Now the unpredictable challenges, the little victories, and the constant presence of her son's needs. She adjusted her apron, picked up the tray of orders waiting at the counter, and continued her work as if nothing had happened, even though her heart was still racing. Throughout the morning, Maria reflected on the delicate balance she maintained every day. She worried about bills, about whether she could afford proper therapy sessions for Leo, about how she could make life a little easier for him despite her limited means. Yet, she also felt a sense of pride and love so deep that it kept her going. She had faced so much hardship already, and yet here she was, kneeling on the floor of a bustling diner, crawling alongside her child, and showing him the patience and understanding that most adults around him lacked by the time the lunch crowd began to trickle in. Maria had returned to her usual rhythm, taking orders, serving coffee, and managing trays while keeping an ever-watchful eye on Leo. She knew that every day would bring its own challenges, but she also knew that as long as she had the strength to stay close to him, to meet him where he was in his world, she could handle whatever came next. It was not just about surviving, it was about being the anchor in her son's life, the safe place he could always come back to, no matter how overwhelming the world might get. And in that moment, as she watched him laugh quietly at a small toy he had brought from home, she felt a quiet reassurance that no matter how difficult life could be, she would always find a way to rise to the occasion for him, for herself, and for the small victories that made each day worth living. Ethan Caldwell was not a man who often found himself in ordinary places. As one of the wealthiest and most private entrepreneurs in the city, he was used to boardrooms, luxury cars, and high-rise offices. But that morning, for reasons he didn't entirely understand, he had decided to visit a small family diner on the edge of downtown. Maybe it was the craving for simple, unpretentious food. Or maybe he wanted a quiet corner away from the constant attention of the world. Whatever the reason, there he was, seated at a corner table, sipping his black coffee and watching the world move around him. The diner was alive with activity. The clatter of dishes, the low hum of conversation, and the occasional ringing of the old cash register created a backdrop that was at once chaotic and comforting. Ethan had always enjoyed observing people, seeing patterns, understanding lives that were so different from his own. He noticed the young waitress who moved with practiced efficiency, balancing trays and orders while keeping an eye on the customers. But what really caught his attention was not her service or her polite demeanor. It was the small, intimate moment he saw unfold near the middle of the diner. A little boy, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, had crawled onto the floor, overwhelmed by the noise and bright sunlight streaming through the windows. He looked tense, his small hands pressing against the tile as if the floor itself could offer some comfort. And beside him, kneeling with patience and quiet determination, was the boy's mother. Ethan watched as she lowered herself fully to the floor, crawling alongside him, speaking in soft, soothing words, and guiding him through the storm of sensory overload. It was a simple act, something that might go unnoticed in any other situation, but to Ethan it was extraordinary. He had seen wealth, power, and influence in every corner of the world, but rarely had he witnessed pure, unselfish dedication like this. The way she mirrored her son's movements, the gentle touch on his back, the calm reassurance in her voice, it was as if she had stepped into his child's world completely, abandoning her own comfort to meet him where he was. There was no rush, no frustration, only a quiet, steadfast presence that seemed almost magical in its effect. Other customers were beginning to notice too. Some whispered to each other, shaking their heads as if this scene were unusual or disruptive. A few looked embarrassed, as if witnessing a private moment in public was somehow uncomfortable. Yet Ethan felt nothing but admiration. There was courage in vulnerability, he realized, and this woman was demonstrating it without hesitation. She wasn't asking for approval or recognition. She simply cared for her child in the only way she knew how, and she did it with grace. Despite the judgmental eyes of the world around her, Ethan leaned back in his chair, taking a slow sip of his coffee, trying not to interrupt the delicate balance unfolding in front of him. He had wealth, influence, and the kind of freedom most people could only dream of, yet he often felt removed from moments that mattered on a human level. But here, in a small diner with worn-out booths and the smell of frying eggs, he was witnessing something far more valuable than any business deal or social accolade. It was raw, real, and profoundly moving. Maria's voice was calm but firm, a steady anchor in the chaos. "It's okay, Leo, I'm right here," she whispered, her words almost a soft melody amidst the diner's noise. Ethan could see the relief slowly wash over the little boy's face, the tension easing as he leaned into his mother's presence. She encouraged him inch by inch, celebrating every small success a hand reached, a tiny step forward, a brief smile. Each movement was a testament to patience, love, and resilience. As he watched, Ethan began to reflect on his own life. He had experienced incredible highs and lows, but he had rarely been so quietly inspired. Power and money could build empires, but they could not replicate the kind of unwavering care he was witnessing. The dedication of this mother, her ability to place her child's needs above her own exhaustion and embarrassment, left a deep impression on him. There was humility in her strength, a lesson in every gesture. When Maria finally guided Leo back to the booth and he settled into the seat with a small sigh of relief, Ethan noticed the subtle exhaustion in her posture. Her knees were scraped and dusty from crawling on the floor, her apron slightly rumpled, and yet she moved with grace as she resumed taking orders. There was no self-pity, no complaint, only determination, and the quiet pride of someone who had faced a challenge and met it with courage. Ethan found himself unconsciously analyzing the scene, the way she spoke, the way she moved, the small, loving gestures that others might have overlooked. He understood immediately that this was not a woman who relied on luck or chance. She had cultivated patience, resilience, and empathy because life had demanded it of her. He also realized that she likely struggled daily, that every meal she served, every shift she endured, was part of a constant effort to provide for her child. And yet, she carried herself with dignity and care, without complaint, without bitterness. That as the morning moved forward, Ethan's attention remained fixed on Maria and Leo. He noticed how she balanced her responsibilities, how she kept an eye on the floor while delivering trays to other tables, and how she never let frustration show even when the diner grew more crowded and chaotic. The respect he felt for her deepened with each passing moment. She wasn't just a mother. She was a silent hero, facing daily battles that most people could not even imagine. At one point, Maria finally noticed him watching and felt a sudden jolt of embarrassment. She straightened her apron, wiping her hands on a towel, expecting perhaps a look of irritation or judgment. But Ethan surprised her by smiling gently. He didn't offer criticism or advice. He only nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the quiet strength he had just witnessed. There was no condescension, no pity, only respect. In that brief interaction, Maria felt a flicker of relief. Someone had seen her effort, her devotion, and had recognized the humanity in what she was doing. For Ethan, the experience lingered long after the boy had calmed and the mother had returned to her duties. He felt a sense of awe and inspiration that few things in his world had ever evoked. It reminded him that life's most profound moments often happened in ordinary places, in acts of patience and care that went unnoticed by most people. It was a lesson in humility, compassion, and the quiet heroism that existed every day in the lives of ordinary people. By the time he finished his coffee, Ethan felt a mix of admiration, respect, and curiosity. He knew he had witnessed something rare, a mother's love in its purest, most resilient form, and although he would leave the diner like any other customer, he knew that the image of Maria crawling on the floor with her son, tenderly guiding him through the storm of his emotions, would stay with him far longer than the taste of coffee or the ambience of the diner. In that simple, unexpected moment, to lives one of immense wealth and influence, the other of quiet struggle and resilience. Ethan Caldwell, a man accustomed to power and control, saw the extraordinary strength in someone who had none of the privileges he enjoyed, and Maria, unaware of the profound impact she had on this observer, continued to pour her love into her son, proving that the smallest acts of courage and patience could leave the deepest impressions. Maria had just returned to her routine, carrying trays of food and taking orders, when she noticed the man from the corner table glance up at her. For a moment, their eyes met, and she felt a sudden flutter of embarrassment. She straightened her apron quickly, her cheeks warming. She had expected a disapproving look or perhaps a harsh word about the scene with her son earlier. Instead, the man, who she now realized was not an ordinary customer, gave her a small, gentle nod, a nod that felt almost like recognition, but not of something trivial. It was recognition of the effort, the patience, and the unwavering love she had just shown her child. When Maria approached his table to take his order, she apologized almost reflexively. "I'm sorry about the scene earlier. He can get a little overwhelmed sometimes," she said, her voice soft but tinged with nervousness. She had grown used to people staring, judging, or whispering behind her back, but she had rarely experienced kindness in response to her struggles. The man smiled at her, and it was a smile that carried warmth rather than judgment. "No need to apologize," he said. "You handled that very well. Most people would have panicked or been frustrated, but you stayed calm. That takes courage." Maria blinked, unsure how to respond. Courage? She didn't feel particularly courageous. She felt exhausted, drained, and sometimes hopeless. She had spent her life moving from one challenge to the next, balancing shifts at the diner, childcare, and bills that never seemed to stop coming. Courage was not something she thought about. It was something she had to summon every day. Like an invisible fuel she had no choice but to use. And yet, here was a stranger acknowledging it, noticing something she thought went unseen. The man's words were calm and sincere, and Maria found herself opening up in a way she rarely did with anyone outside her small circle of friends. She told him a little about her life, her struggles as a single mother, and the small victories she cherished each day. She spoke about Leo, her shy, sensitive little boy, and how she tried to give him the world despite having so little. She admitted the challenges, juggling 2 jobs, managing medical bills, and trying to find the right resources to help him grow. She spoke quickly at first, then more slowly, realizing that this man was not judging her but listening. He listened with an intensity that was almost disarming. There was no interruption, no glance at a watch or phone, only focused attention, the kind that makes someone feel truly seen. Maria felt herself relaxing, the tension of the morning's chaos slipping from her shoulders as she spoke. There was something about his presence that made her feel that her struggles mattered, that her devotion as a mother mattered, that the small acts of love she performed each day were not invisible. That as the conversation continued, Maria realized that the man had not just observed her interactions with her son, he had understood them. He asked gentle, thoughtful questions about Leo's preferences, his routines, and what helped him feel calm when he was overwhelmed. He seemed genuinely interested, as though he wanted to understand the small details that made up her world. Maria was struck by the contrast between this man's life and hers. He seemed to live in a world of power, wealth, and opportunity, while her life was full of limitations, challenges, and constant worry. Yet here he was, taking time to notice her world, valuing it, and even admiring it. There was a quiet moment when Leo, sensing a brief pause in his mother's attention, reached for a small toy in his backpack and smiled shyly. Maria glanced at him, and the man noticed too. He smiled gently and said, "You've raised a wonderful child. That patience, that care, he's lucky to have you." Maria felt her throat tighten. Compliments were not something she heard often, not in relation to her role as a mother. People recognized hard work or ambition, but rarely the quiet, tireless efforts that made up the majority of her days. To hear someone recognize the heart behind her actions was both humbling and overwhelming. Throughout their brief conversation, Maria noticed the other customers watching. Some still whispered, but their murmurs seemed less important now. The focus was no longer on judgment or chaos. It was on understanding and respect. Ethan Caldwell, as she would later learn his name, had a way of seeing what others overlooked. He didn't just see a mother and her struggling child. He saw resilience, empathy, and the courage required to keep going in the face of relentless challenges. The conversation eventually turned to lighter topics, and Maria found herself laughing softly for the first time that morning. She realized she had been carrying a weight she didn't even fully recognize: the stress of constant survival, the fear of not doing enough, the worry that her efforts might never be appreciated. Yet here was a stranger who had noticed it, acknowledged it, and treated it with sincerity. The experience, simple as it might have seemed, felt transformative by the time the order was ready. Maria had regained some of her composure. She delivered the food to his table, her hands steady, her posture upright. Ethan watched her with a kind smile, a quiet reassurance that she had done nothing wrong and everything right. It was in that small exchange, the way he accepted her without judgment, the way he acknowledged her effort, that Maria felt a spark of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. As he began to eat, he asked her if she had support or family nearby, not out of curiosity, but with genuine concern. Maria admitted that most of her family was far away and that she relied heavily on friends and colleagues, and sometimes on sheer determination. Ethan nodded thoughtfully, as though the pieces of her story were forming a clear picture of the life she led. He didn't offer advice or pity, he offered respect and validation, two things that had been in short supply in Maria's life. When Maria returned to her duties, she found herself reflecting on the encounter. Something about this man's presence, his attention and his understanding had shifted something inside her. She had been seen, not just for the work she did, but for the heart and effort behind it. And though the interaction was brief, it left an impression far deeper than any casual compliment ever could. As the morning wore on, Maria continued to serve other customers, her movements smooth and confident, but her mind lingered on the corner table, on the quiet, sincere recognition she had received. She realized that sometimes the smallest gestures of acknowledgement could be profoundly powerful. To be recognized for her humanity, her dedication, and her love for her child was a reminder that even in a world that often seemed indifferent, there were moments of connection, understanding, and kindness. Ethan, finishing his breakfast, watched her return to the floor with a renewed sense of energy and focus. He understood that her life was not easy, and yet she met every challenge with determination, patience, and love. It was rare to witness such strength in its quiet, unassuming form. He left the diner shortly afterward, but the image of Maria crawling on the floor with her son and then returning to her work with unwavering dedication stayed with him. It was a reminder that true courage and compassion often go unnoticed, yet they are the most powerful forces in the world. In that moment, neither of them realized how significant this brief encounter would become. For Maria, it was a rare acknowledgement of her struggles and devotion. For Ethan, it was a reminder that wealth and power could never replace the beauty of human empathy and dedication. And in that small, ordinary diner, their worlds had intersected in a way that would leave a lasting impression on both of them, planting the seeds for something extraordinary yet to come. Maria had just finished clearing a table when the diner's bell rang again, signaling the arrival of new customers. The morning rush had slowed slightly, and she was finally catching her breath. Her knees ached from the earlier chaos with Leo, and her apron was streaked with coffee and crumbs, but she felt a quiet sense of relief. Her son was happily playing with a small toy he had brought along, his laughter soft but genuine. Maria's mind wandered briefly to the man at the corner table, the billionaire who had spoken to her so kindly, who had seen her not just as a struggling waitress, but as a mother showing courage in the most difficult circumstances. She had barely expected him to remember her, and yet something about the calmness in his eyes had stayed with her. As Maria returned to the counter to prepare another round of drinks, the diner manager approached her quietly. "A man left something for you," he said, holding out an envelope. Maria frowned in confusion. "For me?" she asked, glancing around to see if someone had accidentally dropped mail or a note meant for someone else. The manager nodded. "Yes, at table 9. He said it's important." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she took the envelope. It was simple, plain, and heavy in her hand, giving a sense that it contained more than just paper. She slipped it open and found a note, handwritten, in neat, careful letters. Her eyes scanned the words, and she could hardly believe what she was reading. The note praised her strength, patience, and unwavering devotion to her son. It spoke of admiration for her love, her courage, and the tireless way she managed to hold everything together despite the challenges life had thrown at her. Maria's eyes filled with tears, but the note was only part of the surprise. Beneath the note was a cashier's check, large enough to pay off the mounting medical bills that had been a constant source of stress, enough to cover childcare for several months, and still leave a cushion for emergencies. Maria's hand shook, and she pressed the envelope to her chest, unable to comprehend what had just happened. She looked around, half expecting someone to call it a mistake or reveal a hidden camera. But the diner was calm, the morning rush now settling into a quiet lull. She felt an overwhelming mix of disbelief, gratitude, and relief. The weight that had been pressing down on her shoulders for months seemed, for the first time, To lighten that, her mind raced as she thought of Leo, who was still playing quietly nearby. The check represented more than just money. It represented freedom, opportunity, and a chance to breathe without constant worry. She thought of the medical bills that had piled up, the nights she had spent worrying about how to pay for therapy sessions or doctor visits, the constant juggling of work shifts to make ends meet. And now, because of a stranger's extraordinary act of kindness, all of that stress could ease, at least for a while. Maria's emotions were raw, unfiltered. She could barely contain her tears as she knelt beside Leo, showing him the toy he had dropped, trying to calm herself while also feeling the profound impact of what had just happened. She whispered quietly to herself, "I can't believe this. Someone really saw me. Someone really cares." It was a rare, almost surreal moment, where the harsh reality of her daily struggles collided with an unimaginable act of generosity. The diner manager, noticing her reaction, gave her a small, knowing smile but said nothing. Understanding that some moments were private, Maria remained kneeling for a few moments longer, holding the envelope close and feeling a wave of hope she hadn't felt in years. She thought back to the brief conversation she had had with Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire who had left this gift. He had seen her as a human being, not just as a struggling mother, not just as someone in need, but as someone worthy of recognition, respect, and support. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, and returned to her work with a new sense of purpose. Each customer she served now felt like a small victory, not just in the practical sense of doing her job, but in the symbolic sense that life could hold unexpected kindness, that human connection could arrive in the most surprising forms. She smiled at Leo, who looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes, sensing the shift in her mood. "Mummy," he asked softly, tilting his head. She knelt down to his level and hugged him tightly. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. "Everything's going to be okay." Throughout the rest of the morning, Maria found herself replaying the events in her mind. She remembered how Ethan had watched her interact with Leo, how he had asked thoughtful questions, and how his presence had been calm, encouraging, and nonchalant. And now, his actions had gone beyond words. He had acted in a way that would materially change her life. The kindness she had experienced was not fleeting or symbolic. It was real, concrete, and transformative. As she served other tables, she noticed subtle changes in how she moved. There was a lightness in her steps, a steadiness in her hands, and an openness in her smile. The world around her, which had once felt heavy and relentless, now seemed a little softer, a little more forgiving. She even laughed softly when Leo made a small, playful noise from his toy, feeling a joy that had been buried beneath months of exhaustion and worry. Maria's thoughts wandered to what she could do next. The immediate worries, the medical bills, the childcare were now lifted. But beyond that, she realized she had an opportunity to take steps she had postponed for years. Perhaps she could finally enroll in a course to improve her skills, or save for a small apartment of her own. The possibilities that had seemed distant or impossible now felt tangible, achievable. It was not just money. It was hope, a chance to dream again. In the quiet moments between customers, Maria carefully placed the note and check in her apron pocket, not wanting to lose them. She glanced toward the corner table where Ethan had sat, half expecting him to return and watch her reaction. But he was gone. It didn't matter. The impact of his actions had already reached her, and she felt a profound sense of gratitude toward someone she barely knew but who had believed in her when she felt invisible. The rest of the day unfolded with a sense of calm purpose. Maria served her customers with renewed energy, interacted with her colleagues with a lighter heart, and watched over Leo with the pride and love that had always guided her. But now, with the added reassurance that she was not alone in her struggles, the world, for the first time in a long time, seemed willing to meet her halfway. When she finally stepped outside at the end of her shift, the city's streets felt different, not because they had changed, but because she had. The burdens she carried had not vanished entirely, but they had been lightened by an extraordinary act of generosity. A reminder that compassion could come from unexpected places and that the kindness of a stranger could ripple through her life in ways she never imagined. And in that moment, Maria allowed herself to believe in a future that was not dictated by struggle alone. She held Leo's hand tightly as they walked home, the envelope and check safe in her bag, a tangible reminder that even in life's hardest moments, hope and human kindness could arrive when least expected, transforming despair into opportunity and fear into courage. Days passed after that morning, and life began to feel different for Maria. She still worked her long shifts at the diner, still managed the constant challenges of being a single mother, and still worried about Leo's needs. But something intangible had shifted inside her. The fear that she was alone in her struggles, the feeling that the world only saw her as a tired waitress with a demanding child, had eased. There was hope now, a reminder that kindness existed in the world and that her efforts had been recognized in a way that transcended ordinary compliments. Maria spent that week cautiously planning her next steps. She had used the generous check Ethan Caldwell had left to pay off medical bills that had been mounting for months. The debt that had haunted her was gone, and for the first time in years, she felt the relief of not being trapped in constant financial worry. She also used part of the funds to ensure Leo could attend therapy sessions that would help him manage his sensory sensitivities. The thought that he could finally receive proper support brought tears to her eyes. But beyond the practical relief, there was something deeper, a renewed sense of possibility. For the first time in a long time, Maria allowed herself to think about pursuing her long-delayed dream of becoming a certified nurse. It had seemed impossible before, but now she could see a path forward. Meanwhile, life at the diner continued, and Maria moved through her shifts with a quiet energy that was noticeable even to her colleagues. She smiled more easily, laughed more freely, and carried herself with a subtle confidence that came from knowing she had been seen and acknowledged by someone who truly understood what it meant to care deeply for another person. Her bond with Leo also seemed stronger. He noticed her lighter mood, her unburdened presence, and responded with more smiles, more laughter, and a sense of calm that came from sensing his mother's renewed spirit. Then, one quiet afternoon, Ethan returned to the diner. Maria noticed him immediately as he stepped in, calm, composed, and unmistakably present. Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to see him again, and certainly not so soon. He had not returned for recognition or thanks. That much was clear in the way he moved quietly to a corner table and ordered his coffee without fanfare. Yet his presence alone brought an unexpected reassurance to Maria. He seemed interested in the ordinary flow of her life, not as an outsider looking in, but as someone who understood its rhythm and challenges. When Maria approached his table to take his order, she felt a nervous flutter but quickly collected herself. She greeted him politely, and he smiled gently. "I wanted to check on you," he said softly, not in a commanding or patronizing way, but as someone who genuinely cared. "I hope everything has been easier since our last meeting." Maria nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Yes, much easier. You've helped more than you can imagine." Her voice faltered, but he simply nodded, accepting her words without question or expectation. The conversation turned naturally, and for the next few minutes they spoke quietly about everyday matters, the flow of the diner, Leo's little routines, and Maria's aspirations for the future. Ethan listened as attentively as before, asking gentle, thoughtful questions, and responding with encouragement. He inquired about Maria's plans for her nursing course, showing genuine interest without making her feel patronized. His questions were not just idle curiosity. They were a reflection of a deep respect for her determination and resilience. Maria found herself sharing more than she normally would with anyone outside her close circle. She spoke about the challenges she had faced, the sacrifices she had made for Leo, and the small victories that kept her going. Ethan responded not with pity, but with affirmation, showing that he understood the true weight of her daily life. He acknowledged the courage it took to maintain hope while facing constant obstacles, and the value of the unconditional love she gave to her son. Throughout their brief encounters, Maria began to notice something extraordinary about the way Ethan treated her. He did not offer solutions, dictate plans, or flaunt his wealth. Instead, he offered quiet support, listening, understanding, and occasionally guiding her toward opportunities she might not have seen. He remained in the background when necessary, allowing her to feel her own power and autonomy. Yet his subtle interventions, like the check he had left weeks earlier, reminded her that help could come without strings attached, without expectation, simply because someone believed in her. As the weeks turned into months, Maria's life began to change in tangible ways. She enrolled in a nursing certification program, something she had postponed for years because of financial limitations. She was able to pay for proper childcare while attending classes and ensure that Leo received the support he needed. The pressure of constant financial worry eased, allowing her to focus on her goals and her son's development. Each step forward, no matter how small, felt like a triumph, a confirmation that life could offer unexpected turns of fortune when courage and perseverance were present. Ethan occasionally returned to the diner, always unobtrusive, always quiet, and always observant. His presence served as a gentle reminder to Maria that someone out there valued the strength and compassion she showed every day. He never sought recognition, and he never expected gratitude beyond what Maria naturally offered. Over time, she realized that the brief interactions with him had become a source of inspiration, a quiet example of how one person's thoughtfulness could ripple through another's life and spark transformative change. The bond between Maria and Leo strengthened in ways she hadn't anticipated. With the new resources and support, she could focus on creating a stable, nurturing environment for him. She spent more time reading to him, playing games, and exploring the city in small, meaningful ways. Leo's laughter returned in full measure, and Maria marveled at the joy that came from simply being able to meet his needs without constant anxiety and worry. One afternoon, as Maria walked home with Leo after her classes, she reflected on how far she had come. Life was still not easy, and challenges remained, but the weight that had once felt crushing had lifted. She realized that courage, resilience, and quiet determination could open doors in ways she never imagined. And she thought of Ethan, the man who had seen her, who had recognized the beauty and strength in her everyday efforts, and who had acted in a way that changed the trajectory of her life. She smiled, feeling gratitude not just for the financial support, but for the acknowledgement, the respect, and the faith he had shown in her humanity. Maria understood something profound. Life's most extraordinary moments often begin with simple acts of compassion. By recognizing her struggles and honoring her dedication, Ethan had done more than just help her materially. He had given her the confidence to believe in herself and the courage to pursue her dreams. And in doing so, he had shown that true kindness does not need recognition or applause. It can quietly, gently, and irrevocably change lives. Months later, Maria's nursing certification program was progressing well, and Leo was thriving in an environment that nurtured his development. The diner remained her workplace, but it had transformed in her eyes. It was no longer just a place of struggle, but a symbol of resilience, of moments where life's unexpected blessings could appear. Each day, she carried with her the memory of that first morning, of crawling alongside Leo on the diner floor, and the extraordinary gesture of a man who had seen her and acted without hesitation. Maria realized that this experience had reshaped her understanding of what it meant to be supported, to be recognized, and to be believed in. It reminded her that courage and love, when combined with opportunity and kindness, could create a ripple effect powerful enough to alter the course of a life. She no longer felt trapped by circumstances or isolated in her struggles. Instead, she felt empowered, seen, and ready to embrace the future with determination and hope. As she tucked Leo into bed one night, she whispered softly, "We made it, Leo. We're going to be okay." And she believed it with every fiber of her being. Her life had been changed not by luck alone, nor by chance, but by the quiet, deliberate compassion of someone who had recognized her humanity and given her a chance to rise. And that, Maria realized, was more extraordinary than anything she had ever imagined.